into a beautiful butterfly, right? So when we think of that in the garden, maybe we would see this little caterpillar here in our squash. Maybe y'all have dealt with this before. Squash vine borer. And that's its beautiful caterpillar stage there as well. So if we see the caterpillar, the adult, the moth stage. So if we see this moth stage, this caterpillar has already successfully gone through your squash plant and devoured it. So something to think about here. And so this is generally for complete metamorphosis when we go from caterpillar to what we think of a chrysalis and going into a butterfly. Maybe bees, we think of that as well. I know we were talking about beekeeping in here as well earlier. They go through complete metamorphosis, but also it's important to understand incomplete metamorphosis, where the nymphal stage of an insect before it becomes an adult might look completely different. And being on the squash talk here, we've got a squash bug egg, a squash bug nymph in the middle, and then a squash bug further nymph. So there's different nymphal stages as that insect emerges into a complete adult. So it's important to understand that these insects can look differently in their different life stages. And then can't forget about parthenogenesis, which is what aphids do. And so they don't need to go through that whole dating thing and finding a mate. They can just pop babies out, right? So pretty cool. And that's how a lot of our plants, one day you'll go out there and you'll see a few aphids, and then all of a sudden, overnight, parthenogenesis occurred. And all these aphids are lining up the stems of your plant. So that's how a table will do that. All right, so that's asexual reproduction there. So back to our insects and what we're thinking of for order's sake. So I'm going to kind of run through a few of these that we might see and let you all know some good ones and some bad ones, right? That's what we're all here for. But when we're going through here, I want you to think of the mouth parts of these insects, right? So when we think of chewing mouth parts, generally speaking, we're talking about beetles and grasshoppers, right? So grasshoppers, this is what we think of where they literally have those large mandibles and are actually chewing a part of that plant off, right? And so grasshoppers, not something we think of as a pest in our garden, but I just want to show you all here that we're thinking of mouth parts here. And so let's move on here. Let's go to true bugs here. So these are what we think of piercing, sucking mouth parts. So they don't have those large mandibles to chew the leaves. They have like a straw for their mouth, and they're going to poke into that plant and suck that plant material out, right? And so a lot of the time, that's when I was talking about those viruses being transmitted into the plant. These insects are what are transmitting these diseases a lot of the times. So we're going to run through here. A good bug that we would think of with that piercing, sucking mouth part is an assassin bug. And so you can see that long, feeding, straw-like mouth part that's actually going to pierce into that pest and consume it. So this is a beneficial insect here. And so you can actually see a striped cucumber beetle here that's being consumed by this assassin bug. So there are some good ones within the bug order here, Hymenoptera. But back to the squash bug that we had talked about earlier. So again, you might have seen, hopefully all of y'all maybe seen a squash bug. If not, you are lucky. If you grow any cucurbits, you probably had squash bugs. But this is a great example where this insect is going to pierce into that plant material. And what I like to think of this as, it's not just simply taking that plant material, it is also anything in its gut will also be transmitted. So if I'm feeding from this unhealthy plant, and I then move on over to this healthy plant, anything from that unhealthy plant is now going to be transferred over here. Kind of like if I'm sick and I take a drink out of your cup over here with your straw, and I come over here and drink out of this straw, right? And so just like that, we're backwashing, right? So one other way to think of this is an aphid, when it pierces in through that epidermis of that plant, anything in that gut is then going to be transferred, and that's how we get a lot of our viruses that we talked about. Other insects that might do this are the harlequin bug, the sharpshooters, big problem for the blueberry industry as well. When I was down in Georgia, we had to monitor these populations quite heavily through these leafhoppers. And another indirect way that we think of this is aphids or other plants, plant bugs that are actually consuming, produce honeydew, right? And so honeydew is a sticky substance, and you can see that's kind of excreted on the outside of this aphid's cornicles here. And that sticky substance oftentimes gets on the plant or on the plant leaf surface there. And in the natural environment, sooty mold is a is a fungal disease or pathogen that will actually stick onto that sticky substance. So a lot of times when we see this black material on the tulip poplar or some of these other species, it's not actually a fungal issue that we're having to deal with. It's an insect issue that we're having to deal with. So this is a very, very common issue and really cool to think about. Some ants actually farm the aphids for that sugary substance too. A little side note here. So just a little fun tidbit of information there. And they show it in Bugs Life too. Where anyone seen that movie before? Bugs Life? Yeah. The queen ant actually has a pet aphid. And it just talks about that relationship. And I think that's cool when they actually put that into animation. Whereas a lot of the times, you go out and buy a stuffed animal and there's only 2 body parts and 2 wings and then 4 legs. So this is inaccurate, right? So I don't know, just a little side note there. Some of our most destructive Hemiptera bugs are actually scales. And they're most of the time immobile, so they don't move at all in their majority of their life stage here. And so a lot of the times, this is what we can kind of see 3 body parts here with that straw-like mouth part. And that's all they're doing. They are living there the rest of their life, and they are going to suck on that plant material until they move on and sexually reproduce, and the next stage of life occurs, right? And so when we think of this, mealy bugs are a great example, and crepe myrtle bark scale. And so this is what those scales will look like here on the right of the crepe myrtle. However, remember, I talked about honeydew being excreted as they're feeding. That sticky substance can be on that crepe myrtle, and then we've got that black sooty mold that's sticky to that. And so a lot of times when we see this, it's a little too late, and we need to think about controlling that insect instead of the actual sooty mold. So, anyone have crepe myrtles at home and have seen this before? No? Okay. Keep an eye on it. It is moving through Tennessee. It has been found in Knox County, Anderson County, and I'm sure in Roane County as well. Yes.
So more than one insect makes a honeybee, or is it just a bee?
It's most species of bugs, so that feed through that. So scales can do that honeydew production. Aphids can do that honeydew production. A lot of different bugs can. Yeah, good question. And so in this case, it is a scale that's doing it for that crepe myrtle. And then maybe in the aphids case, it would be off the cornicles there. So really cool to see that. Moving over now, talking about some Hemiptera. So these are our orders that include wasps, bees, parasitoids, and I really like to show this. This guy in the background is Dr. Justin Schmidt out of Arizona State, and he actually went through and tested the pain of all of the stings of Hemiptera, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So if you guys are interested in that, I know you guys were asking how many times you've been stung. Well, honeybees are nothing on this scale here. So really cool to think about that as well. But a good example of what we might use in the garden are parasitoids. And a lot of times we don't actually see these little critters. And I'll pass around what these parasitoids look like. But they come in all shapes and sizes. Some people argue that there are more species of parasitoids than any other species in the world. And actually a lot of parasitoids, let me explain what they do first of all. They put their egg inside of the pest, and that pest then thinks it's living a great life until it realizes it's getting eaten from the inside out. And that egg will then develop into another parasitoid wasp. And what's really cool is some of these parasitoids can have super parasitoids that parasitize the parasitoids. Oh, wow. So really cool. So I'm going to pass around this box right here, and you can kind of see that ovipositor that comes through there. But let's see this in the garden. So this is from one of our demonstration gardens, and we just had some, you see, we probably should have had some better cultural practices where it's kind of too thick of tomatoes here, but disregard that. If you look up on the top left, you see a tobacco hornworm, right? Yeah. And so see all these egg masses on the outside? Those are what are called ectoparasitoids. So they actually parasitize on the outside of that insect, but they're still going to kill it because I had the decision, do I leave that and let biology do its work, or do I go ahead and just kill that tobacco hornworm right now? But then all those wasps would not develop. And so come back, all of them emerge, come back, and you can actually see this is still hanging on by a thread. Can't believe it's still hanging on. And you can see all the caps that are open from this ectoparasitoid wasp eggs right there. So really cool that hopefully in the future, more parasitoids can provide this service for me in the garden. All right. Let's move on over. So that was some background on the orders of Hymenoptera. Yes, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. No, that's
Can you take the hornworm off the plant and just let it live over here somewhere and hopefully?
Yeah, because that process is, depending on the species, is only going to take a day or two. So pretty quick process as well. But if we had killed that speckled hornworm, we probably wouldn't have developed. Yep. So Coleoptera are beetles. And going back again, we're talking about chewing mouthparts. So very similar to the grasshoppers, they have these large mandibles that allow them to chew. And when we think of that first image I showed when I started, was the Japanese beetle. And we really see that window pane, and they just skeletorize that entire leaf. Beetles can do something very similar as well. So we can think of a beneficial beetle being like a lady beetle, right? There's over 2,000 species across the knowledge, which are lady beetles. So most of those are good, but there are a few that are not good, and maybe some of them are pests in our homes as well. So think about that. But early season pests, the one that I always think about is the flea beetle. And so flea beetles are that shiny iridescent color, and usually there's a lot of them. And this is kind of the damage that we'll see from the flea beetle. And that's generally one of the first pests that we see early season. Usually early May to late May is when we see these start to emerge. Some other beetles that we might commonly think of, emerald ash borer, right? So we know it's larval stage. We know the damage is done across Tennessee, especially for our hardwood products. Green ash is essentially wiped out in Tennessee. But Japanese beetles are another example here, where they not only do damage as adults, but also as immature larvae forms as well. And I'll talk about how to control these later. But people always ask me, I really like to use traps on a lot of my insects. We have to understand their biology first, right? So a lot of the times these traps will actually encourage more to your property than actually eliminate. So definitely don't try to put in Japanese beetle traps at all. And today I did not wear my costume for the emerald ash borer, so I do have one of those. But going back to this, guys, again, we're thinking about the mouth parts of these insects. And if that's all you can take away from this, I would be happy, because it is very difficult to understand and know all 1 million species of insects. So when we run through here, just know that resources that you have available, my go-to is You Can Control Garden Insects. And so here it has a chart of, let's say we've got watermelon that we're growing. It's going to give me, okay, aphids eat watermelon, cucumber beetles eat watermelon, rhineworms, spider mites. So these are some common pests on watermelon. So it helps us to get a process of elimination on some common pests with watermelon. And then, thank you for that idea. And then it'll, let's just say we're talking about cucumber beetles here. It'll give you recommendations on which insecticides to apply as well, and maybe some cultural practices to utilize as well. So love this publication. It is PB 595. You Can Control Garden Insects. Right. So again, let's go back to inspecting our crops for damage. Damage can come in many forms, right? So when we're thinking about what I've talked about is piercing and sucking mouth parts. We can see maybe thrashing of that plant, maybe egg laying. I'll show you a picture of what egg laying would look like, especially boxwoods, get that a lot. Disease that's transferred, internal feeding, even subterranean underneath that root as well. Like Japanese beetles can eat the roots as well. And then chewing mouth parts as well. So 2 years ago, we got a lot of pictures of some yards that looked like a disease, right? I mean, just straight from green to brown. There's a lot of browning grass diseases out there to discuss. But when you get closer and actually take a transect of that area, we actually figured out it was the fall armyworm. And so it had actually come through in waves, and that was the feeding habit of that caterpillar. So it's important to actually do a transect, dive into what that issue is. And when we're thinking about controlling these, a lot of times we think about killing them as adults, but really we need to think about killing them when they're just slowly into that larval stage here. So for Japanese beetles, for example, a lot of times we'll see them as adults in that summer period, and we can try to kill them as best we can as adults. But really, that's only going to be a little bit of a revenge after they've already done their damage. So what we can do is let's try to kill the babies, right? So if we think about this, August to September period, that is right after they've laid their eggs. Their eggs have emerged into a smaller larval form, and they're really shallow into that soil right there. So if we try to put a granular insecticide in the turf in January, November, December, they're way too deep. They're not going to be affected. They're a little bit too large. They're not going to have any susceptibility to being eliminated there. So think about that. When we're applying a product, what is the most susceptible time to apply that product if needed? And of course, we've got lawn insects, how to control them. And so maybe we've got some organic options like Grub X here on how to control some of these grubs too. So those of you that are interested in turf, feel free to ask some questions on it as well. I'm trying to touch on garden, turf, ornamentals, everything here. So squash vine border, I had mentioned that earlier. And so, if we're going out there and we're scouting our gardens, in the best case scenario, we would have found these golden eggs here and maybe scrape them off, right? Maybe we would have found some other squash bug eggs and scrape those off. And so we're always monitoring what these eggs look like as well. If we missed it, okay, it's boring inside the base of our plant, and we see this frass excrement coming out the base of the plant. Well, what we can actually do is, it's kind of nasty, but you actually remove that larva from there with maybe some forceps, or make a slit in that root right there and remove it, and then pile some dirt so to encourage secondary roots so that that plant can continue to produce for us. So that's a cultural practice that we could do, where if we try to apply an insecticide, it's not going to have any contact because it's inside that plant. So some other ways that we can think of for that. And of course, when we're thinking about sanitization, right? So if I, okay, this plant's dead, I'm going to remove it and throw it in my compost. Potentially it could overwinter, but if it's in your compost, it's got a perfect place. It doesn't heat up to the right temperature. So hopefully, or not hopefully, but maybe be an issue for next year too. So think about this, of how we're sanitizing our gardens. And so right now is a great time to think about it. So we've got, a damaged plant here on lots of different types of damage that we talked about here, whether it's from feeding, a disease like rust, or maybe even some cankers as well. We want to just burn this material or throw it away completely. Okay, we don't want to put this in a compost situation that we can't track and are actually monitoring the temperature of it. And so in my case, I don't have the best compost situation, so I want to review that site. Healthy plants, okay, yeah, we can throw that in the compost for next year. Maybe chop them up into smaller pieces so they break down a little bit better. And when y'all ever think about composting as well, that's a completely different discussion. The minimum temperature to actually remove the diseases and potentially break down some pests is going to be about 130 degrees, very minimum. So think about turning that compost material, following the recommendations that we have, and getting it to that right temperature at the internal 130 degrees. Bam. All right. Of course, today we've got a game at 3:30, and always during fall season, we might think about just forgetting about our garden and just doing other activities. But we've got to think about that fall end of season cleanup, and so that is what I mentioned: removing that crop debris. Definitely, it might be a little too late right now, especially with our dry soils, especially too. But thinking about cover crops and making sure we're not leaving any bare soil. Managing weed populations so that they don't set seeds for next season as well, because that can harbor a lot of our pests. When we're looking at our garden calendars and our catalogs that are coming in, we can always look at varieties based on taste, flavor, all these other factors, but we've got to start considering the resistance to a lot of these diseases. If you start to see blight coming up on your tomatoes and you just really love your heirloom tomatoes, it might be either one, let's rotate from doing any of tomatoes next year and just take a break so that we can disrupt that population of pests and diseases, or let's start selecting resistant varieties. So maybe that wouldn't be an heirloom one. Don't worry, I love heirloom tomatoes, but there are awesome hybrids to select that might be resistant to some blight and other diseases as well. And then I'll talk about supporting beneficial insects here in the second portion. Right, so it's all about confusing the pests, right? We don't want them to keep track that every year Seth is growing tomatoes and it is a party over there in our garden to always have the same pests, the same diseases building up. Because over time, as they build up and we're not rotating our crops, we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot and decreasing our yields. So, real quick, I got to talk about bugs on our most wanted list because this is about the good and the bad. So I mentioned a few already that we commonly see in the garden, but as you all, as citizen scientists, as master gardeners, as fellow stewards of Tennessee, I gotta have you know a few of these. And so the first one I'm gonna pass around is a pinned, and if you want to see what one looks like in full coloration, you can here as well. But this is a spotted lanternfly. And so the first one was actually detected just about a month ago, so September 28th, 2023, in Nashville. So these had been moving their way along interstates from Pennsylvania, and slowly made its way down 81 here, right? So it was found in Nashville, and I'm sure it will probably be found. They're most active mid-July to frost, so next mid-July we really need to keep an eye on this. And their egg masses can be on trucking routes, on the truckers, rigs there as well. That's usually how we consider them to be transferred. And of course, we live on I-40 here, right? So something to keep note of, and to know that they're plant, they're a hemiptera, and they're a plant hopper. There we go. And so they're actually going to have that piercing, sucking mouth part. So if y'all like to drink beer or wine like I do, our hops industry and our wine industry, grapes are going to be affected because they will potentially kill some of our ornamentals and hops and grape plants as well. So something to think about there. All right. If you see one, what to do? Get on Tennessee Department of Agriculture's website, and you can report that pest. Always take a picture. First, maybe kill that insect. But just like this picture shows up here, they can congregate around that base of the stem quite heavily too. So it's probably not going to be the case that you just find one. So please, if y'all heard about this on the news, hopefully. Okay, some of y'all have. Cool. Now you know. Another one, crepe myrtle bark scale. This is data of which counties it was in. This map was pulled in 2019. And so you can see it's already made its way through Tennessee. So these pests are building up and making their way as well. So I'm already not a crepe myrtle fan anyway. There's other species to incorporate, not just crepe myrtles. But if we already have these in our landscape like I do, some things that we can do is just keep those plants happy, right? So let's not top them. If they're topped, they're going to be more susceptible to diseases and pests and invasions. Of course, fire ants. I like to show the 2018 quarantine because that has already failed. They are everywhere in Tennessee now. But we've got a two-step method, and you're welcome to go to fireants.utk.edu if you want to learn more about how to treat your fire ant mounds. The best is when they're actively foraging, so now is not the time to do this method. But when they're actively foraging and the weather's warm, that is when we go out and we put a bait and wait, right? We wait maybe 2 weeks. Let them consume that bait. It weakens their population. It's not going to kill them all, but it's going to weaken them. And then we're going to go through and we're going to treat individual large mounds in high traffic areas, maybe where a playground is, or maybe near your driveway. And we're trying to basically knock that population down. And a lot of times this method is best when we work with our neighbors, do this method as well, and try to do it at the same time. So think of us as a geographical initiative here. And there's some potential products that we could utilize for that. But you can find that on the website. And then, of course, every summer we get calls about, hey, we've got the Asian giant hornet right here in my backyard. I'm the first yard to ever find the Asian giant hornet, and I'm going to become famous and on the news. But it's probably one of these two. So I'm going to pass one of these two around here. On the left is a European hornet. When you're looking at this, the main thing that I angled this at for was you're going to see a teardrop structure on its abdomen in rows, almost like you're crying after getting stung, like the Schmidt pain index. And then here on the right is a cicada killer. So these guys actually paralyze the cicada and take it to its nest and feeds it to its young. So you can see these are two of our largest hornets in Tennessee, but they're nowhere near the size of an Asian giant hornet. So pretty cool to see those two examples that are already here in Tennessee. And you can see the distribution here. Asian giant hornet has only been found in the Pacific Northwest, in Vancouver and Seattle, Washington. It has not been found anywhere else. Then these little dots here are just where the centers are. European hornet, you can see that's widespread in the East Coast here. Eastern cicada killer, that is east of the divide. And then we also have the common southern yellow jacket too, but that's much, much smaller, and I did not include that on that. So yeah, just so you guys know. Hemlock woolly adelgid, of course, there's different treatments for this as well. But for a residential setting, there's some easier methods that we could use that might not include soil drench or tree injection. But if I ever have this issue at a larger scale, I'd probably reach out to an ISA certified arborist to do those practices. So something to keep an eye out on. If y'all have hemlocks at home, you'll see these like very similar to the mealy bug where it builds up with that substance. Very similar structure there. Yes, sir.
We had an aerial spray up north for them, and the trees died anyway.
That's sad.
Yeah. Two neighbors and myself ate this guy from up there. He flew around.
Yeah.
They all died anyway.
We would not recommend aerial sprays anyway. So yeah. Tree injection is usually the most effective with dinofuturin. That's a great product to utilize, and there's some other systemic insecticides to utilize too. So would not recommend the aerial ones. If you just have one hemlock, you can also use like a horticultural oil timed around February or March. That should hopefully knock back a lot of that population as well. But that doesn't work when they're 100 feet tall. So something to consider there. So those are some of our most wanted ones that are either quarantined as a huge newly invaded pest. And so some of the ones I also had already mentioned, like the flea beetle and some aphids, some early season pests here. Other pests, of course, I worked on the spotted Drosophila. We know the brown marmorated and stink bug are the ones coming in our homes right about now. They can also feed on tomatoes and a wide range of hosts. Bagworms, a lot of the times we'll see these where people are like, I didn't know my Leland Cypress or Eastern Red Cedar or whatever evergreen you have. They're like, I didn't know they produce cones. Well, they're not cones. They're from a bagworm that builds a case with the dead needles that it produces. So keep an eye out for these bagworms. They can be monitored if they're caught early, so you don't have to think about an actual insecticide spray. And earlier I was talking about damage where they put egg laying inside the leaf. The most common one I see is the boxwood leaf miner. And a lot of times you see these spots that are developing on these boxwoods. And actually in between the margins are the boxwood leaf miner that will emerge. So another internal theme there. And I never recommend boxwoods because there's many pests where they're called boxwood leaf miner. Boxwood something. So right, that's kind of something we want to tack on here. When we're selecting plants to put in the landscape, maybe not select the ones that are going to be troublesome with other pests associated with them. So methods that we can utilize to prevent these pest populations. I'm going to jump into a few of these about integrated pest management here. But when we're thinking about this, we just want to diversify our plantings. We want to confuse the bugs, right? So here on the right, a bug's guide to garden pests. Number one, this gardener is just spraying just to spray, right? And that's not a fix-all. And I know you guys know that. So some other things that we can think about, selecting resistant varieties. And a healthy plant will hopefully deter a lot of these issues, whether it's pest buildup, disease buildup, or even competition with weeds as well. All right. Not all bugs are bad. Less than 1% of insects are actually considered pests, whether in the home, harmful to human health, harmful to our crops and what we eat, our livestock. So remember, most bugs out in the environment are not a pest. All right, so what is a beneficial insect, right? So something that actually provides us an ecosystem service. So there's three main topics that I want to discuss here. The first one is a predator. And what we think of as a praying mantis is eating another pest, right? Parasitoids, that's the one that I mentioned, inserts that egg, and then pollinators. And so ecosystem service is something that basically performs a service for us. And so when we think of this is honeybees, right? They not only perform a service by giving us honey for humans to eat, but they also increase our crop yields. So a lot of our, I just love the example of blueberries, right? A lot of our blueberry production systems, they contract out honeybees to increase and improve their yields because the more blooms that are serviced, the larger our product's going to be, our yield. And so let's jump into pollinators here. I really want to do this distinction for those of you that are already familiar or maybe not. Honeybees are just one species of bee, Apis mellifera. And I know we were talking about there's the Russian ones, those are the types of what we think of Apis mellifera. Then there's native bees, and there's over 4,000 native bees in North America. And really cool, there's a book, The Backyard Bees of North America, that helps you dive into a lot of these. And you can see just how diverse a lot of these are with that European honeybee in the middle. And so European honeybees are not native, right? They're from Europe. So we have native bees in North America that Native Americans were using to pollinate squash well before the honeybee was introduced here. So I know I kept bees in these typical lane straw hives, and that's what we think of is when we're driving down the road, they look like filing cabinets, right? The lane straw hives, I can't remember what year it was developed, 1932, something like that. So we have not changed from that, but it is, and beekeepers here can tell me, it is an expensive and time-invested hobby, right? Yes, yes. So I am not here to say everyone needs honeybees. No. But everyone can help encourage and promote honeybees and native bees at the same time, right? And so in doing that, a lot of people think about the mason bee hotels where there's these little twigs that they can actually sting nest. We talked about that leaf cutter bee that would cut the leaf and bring it to its nest. This is what it's bringing it back to, right? To create these hollowed out nest situations for its young. But I'm not a fan of these because after they've been used, they're done. They're spent, right? So why are we wasting money on these? But what we all have are sticks. We all have sticks. So instead of burning these sticks or removing them or making cuttings or just cleaning up our debris, it's good for sanitation about disease, but we can use a lot of these for our native bees to spin nest in. So next time you're thinking about that, we can create our own spin nesting bee habitat here. That's a practice that we think of if you guys have ever heard of the Smart Yard program with UT Extension, that's one of the practices is using hollowed out stems, maybe from a hydrangea or something else, and utilizing it for our native bee population. And I gotta throw this shout out as well, and I'm gonna pass this around. Here on the left, we have a carpenter bee with a very, very shiny abdomen and not very many hairs to pick up that pollen, right? So it's not very efficient pollinator, the carpenter bee. And then on the right is a type of bumblebee, just a common bumblebee that you think of. And it does have that hairy abdomen and lots of more surface area for that pollen to stick onto and transfer from flower to flower. So let's talk about not so pollinators. Carpenter bees are notorious for robbing flowers. So what does that mean? It is going in with its mouth parts and cutting open a slit in that flower, like you can see here. And it is actually not going to rub up on the anther or anything to gather some of that pollen. It is actually going to just remove that nectar with its proboscis and remove it without any pollination service. So it's robbing the plants. So when there was an early 2000s study for blueberry, again, I do blueberry examples, to measure what percentage of blueberry flowers were robbed, and it was 100%. So very cool to see. The carpenter bees are just too big. They can't get into the mousy or tiny blooms of a blueberry. So they're just gonna cut that open, steal that nectar. So I give you all permission to go ahead and get a tennis racket and kill these suckers. In my yard, I have holes all through my deck. And I always have to go through there and manage my carpenter bees every year, no matter what I try to do, or what I try to spray. So definitely we don't like carpenter bees, and I wanted to throw that one out there. Parasitic wasp, we talked about that. Great parasitoid, and running through here again. Let's jump over to predators. We always think of, lady beetles as being cute and cuddly, but when you get down to what they're actually doing, they're eating a lot of pests. They're meat-eating machines. Another example of a meat-eating machine are circuit flies or hoverflies. And so not only do they look like a bee and actually provide some sort of pollination as well, they also, as a larva or maggot, they'll actually go up to a pest like an aphid and break its leg off and eat that aphid from that leg that it just broke off. So they are mean to their pests there. So really cool to see that. Soldier beetles running through here. A lot of times we see goldenrod. We'll see soldier beetles on top of those as well. They eat a lot of our pests. Assassin bugs, I've shown you all that one is a piercing, sucking mouth part. Ground beetles, these are our weeds on the ground surface here. They can eat up to 50 caterpillars in its lifetime. So that's more than any spray, any product that you're putting in your garden for that one ground beetle. Green lacewings, remember when we were out there scouting for eggs or pests? These eggs are actually going to be attached by this little filament here. And you can see how these lacewing eggs will look a lot different than some of our pest eggs that we would see on the underside of the leaves. So green lacewings are fantastic. You can see how they're going to be consuming the pest at that larval stage. So this is a larval green lacewing, and then this is an adult lacewing here that we could see. Lady beetles, again, there's over 2,000 different species, so we can just pick apart all of these. But generally speaking, they're all going to have that similar structure with that similar immature stage here with that UT orange. Hunting wasp, so this could also include that European honeybee, or oh my gosh, European hornet, where that teardrop shape is right there, and that's what I passed around as well. So they do provide services there. Robber flies as well. And I have to give a shout out to spiders. Although they're not insects, they have a lot of different hunting mechanisms, and they do provide a lot of biological service for consuming pests. And I actually did my research on a lot of different spiders, where I would collect their gut and actually see what they were eating. And they were the only insect or spider predator. They were the only predator that were actually consuming the spotted Drosophila in blueberry ecosystem. So what does that mean? Is they have a wide range of hosts that they can eat, and they could potentially eat a lot of the pests in your garden as well. And there's some cool ones. There's the peacock spider, and that one's native to Hawaii, the smiley face spider. So when I went to Hawaii, I did not see one. I was looking, but I did not see it. Okay, so how do I promote these beneficials? And then we'll wrap up. Has plenty of time for questions here. 3 things I'm going to go through here is pollinator safety. We're not spraying when it's windy. We're spraying with the right product. We've identified the right pests. IPM is all included in that, and then a diversity of flowering plants. So pollinator safety is all about minimizing the risk. And so what is risk? Is toxicity times exposure. So exposure is what we think of maybe what time of day we're spraying. If we're spraying at the sun's highest peak, that is generally speaking when bees are going to be foraging, is at the sun's highest peak in a typical day. Now, if we can think about spraying in maybe in the evening or potentially, right at sunset, potentially, that would be a better time to less expose some of our pollinators. Toxicity as well. When we're thinking about which product to utilize, maybe we're not going to the restricted use one, and we're going to a more easy insecticidal soap before we get to that one. So look at our options here. And just think about this when you're a bee, how many different ways that you could potentially pick up a systemic pesticide, right? So bees drink water, and any runoff from your systemic insecticide spray could potentially be then carried over to the bee's hive. Think about a windy day. If you're spraying on a windy day, and somehow that windy day has gotten some of those molecules on the outside of a flower during that bee's visitation, you could pick up that systemic insecticide. And then just something to think about too is when bees are flying, they are statically charging their wings, so they're more susceptible to pick up some of those insecticidal particles as well. So just lots of things to consider here. So IPM, we're correctly identifying the pests, and we're targeting, like I mentioned with the Japanese beetle, like when we would actually spray for that. So in that case, it was September period when right after it laid its eggs and those larvae were emerging, but it all depends on that insect, right? So we're going to dive into which insect we have and the best time to spray that product or monitor that product. So, here on the bottom is again that boxwood leaf miner. We see the pupa in here. So if we try to spray this, it's not going to do anything. It's protected by the leaf. So maybe we could trim that off. That's a cultural practice. Remove it so it won't become an adult. If it's not too taking over the whole boxwood. But if it is taking over the whole boxwood, maybe we wait until May when these pupa emerge into adults, and we spray and kill the adults before they can mate and let the process occur again. So always think about what is the best time to hit their susceptible life stages to actually be an effective application. And it will hopefully save us money, not putting product out as much. The pyramid all starts from the bottom. So IPM, integrated pest management. Before we even think about spraying, we're trying to do our cultural practices here, right? So we're selecting maybe resistant crops, resistant cultivars. We're crop rotating. We're selecting the right sites. If we put our garden bed in a shaded environment and poor drainage, we're gonna get disease, right? We need good drainage to do that. So a lot of these cultural practices are things that you guys are already thinking of. Physical and mechanical, so we're weeding, we're potentially using traps, but not for Japanese people. Biological is we're promoting our predators and parasitoids, and then all the way the last option is some of our insecticidal soaps and insecticides. All right, I'm not going to run through that, don't have time, but I do want to give you all some suggestions for some flowers that we can incorporate. And the main take home here is there's not one set flower mixture or recommendation. It's what you guys like, but when you guys are thinking about which ones to select, we don't want to select ones that bloom all at the same time. So if they're all blooming in June and there's nothing blooming in August or September, not only is that not aesthetically pleasing for our landscape, but it's not pleasing for our pollinators or our beneficial insects that are looking for resources, right? So this is something put out from the XERC Society, and you can see the bloom period here on the left, where it talks about, early in the season, we might have some of that milkweed come up. Middle of the season, we have some of the more asters and joe pie weed. And then into the season, we would get some of that, buttonbush or potentially goldenrod or some other items too. So making a map and a plan of which species to put out there. And they're all not created equally. So when we're thinking about food nectar plants, it's the nectar and the pollen provide the carbohydrates and the protein, right? So this plant that has a huge showy flower like a hydrangea, right? Huge, beautiful flower, has very, very little resources for pollinators or beneficial insects. And yes, I keep saying pollinators, but even our predators, if they're not eating pests, they can also utilize pollen and nectar resources as well. And that's something that we can consider. Clovers, a big fan of clovers, especially red and crimson clover. Great bang for our buck, especially with soil stewardship as well and adding nitrogen to the soil. Best time to seed there is August 15th to October 1st. Sweet alyssum, these are often a great border plant, maybe along a walkway, and they do great during drought. So right now, they would have been great during drought. Buckwheat. Buckwheat seeds very well. If you guys think you have a black thumb, sure, grow some buckwheat here. And so these guys emerge pretty quickly. Germination about 3 weeks. But as soon as the frost hits them, they're done. So don't think about putting this in, early May, and then you get surprised with the frost that had killed that germination. Cornflower / bachelor's button. I just call it cornflower. This one's really cool because even when it's not in bloom like this, it has extra floral nectar. So instead of robbing the flower, it says, "Oh, I have nectar here for you." So really cool resource there, even when it's not in bloom. Cosmos, plenty of different colors to pick through, and goldenrod, great late season benefit here. I think there's 50 different species of solidago. I think I pronounced that correctly. Great one to pick from. If you guys haven't been to Tennessee Naturescapes to pick out some native plants, really cool to look at all the different species that they have available there. Sunflower, great late season as well. Great bang for your buck, whether you go the large varieties or the smaller ones. And for those of you that beekeep, new study came out that showed potentially 30% reduction in varroa mite populations provided sunflower pollen as a resource. So that research was published in December of 2022, sunflower-associated reductions in varroa mite infestations. So really cool to look into that. And yeah, I think I hit a perfect amount of time. Any questions, y'all?
Milkweed bugs, the oranges and things. Those are, tell us about those.
are you talking about like seed bugs, like Lygus seed bugs, and they have that orange? They were kind of emerging a few weeks ago, and you're seeing them in your house. Is that what
No,
you're
no,
talking
no,
about?
no, they're on the milkweed, especially the native milkweed.
Okay.
Loads of them. And they're orange and black. I see, you know, what you would think would be eggs on the other side, and then these come out. I don't know what the real name of it is.
Okay. Again, it's hard to identify a lot of them. I'll show you a picture of what I think you're talking about.
No.
Okay. Well,
These other ones,
maybe if you could get a picture of it.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so-
they're very prevalent. They don't seem to harm the plant, so I'm just, yes, more so that.
Let's see.
They're really,
Yeah. So that's the nip stage. of
Okay.
What I just showed you.
oh, okay.
Yes. Yes.
So tell me about this.
So hemiptera, again, piercing sucking mouth part, so it's going to be piercing into that. And so that orange color that you would see is the nymphal stage of this
Okay.
seed bug here. And so this is a pest that we have in our house because it just tries to overwinter. And so again, it's just an insect that's trying to consume resources. And you know, milkweed is supposed to be consumed by the monarch, right?
Monarch,
And the
right.
caterpillar. So it's just the balancing of, you know, if you try to remove that, you could potentially have off-target effects on what you want that milkweed to be consumed by. So just monitoring that population. And then the biggest thing I get with these seed bugs are, and it's Lygus seed bugs, if you guys want to look it up, or box elder bugs, if you want to look it up. Very common. Just monitoring the
Okay.
accounts.
So back to the Japanese beetle.
Yeah, back that's forever.
So I got one plant that they love. And I just gave up. It never kills the plant, it just looks bad. So it's now too late to dig around in the dirt and find these little larvae.
Yep. So now in November, it's a little too late. Around September, October, if you use a product that has, and I had that lawn insects control. So what the theory is here is, you know, in your turf area, that young, the larvae of those Japanese beetles are going to be feeding on the roots of grass and other species. So if we try to put down a pelletized or granular insecticide, like Rub X, which is an organic product, for those of you that really want an organic product, it has very little residual effect on other off-target effects too. If we put that down in potentially September period, you would have a great decrease of population for your next year. And then whatever adults emerge in, you know, June, July, should hopefully be a lot less than the previous year.
Okay.
But that doesn't eliminate any one of the Japanese beetle adults that are congregating and flying from elsewhere, right? So again, it could be an effort that people in their neighborhood utilize, maybe, but
So for now though, could I look in the soil and see what's going on, or is that kind of futile?
it might be a little futile just because the larval structures, there's a lot of white grubs, some of those might be like a rhinoceros beetle, which are actually beneficial, that actually break down some material, and Japanese beetles, and they're very difficult to differentiate. You have to actually identify them based on their raster, which is like their butt, and you have to count the hairs to actually identify it. So even if you bring me a white grub, I'll have a really hard time identifying it. So yeah.
Just wait till next.
Wait till next year, and then think about using a granular insecticide product if you are having issues with the populations. And then I always like the mechanical method of smashing them. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
back to their dumpster.
yeah, full revenge.
And
Cool.
there's an online question here, thoughts on nematodes for pest management.
So a lot of times that has to do with soil management, and is this a nematodes in the same garden plot area, or
We don't know that.
okay,
And the
okay.
question, it just came off of the.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I can't speak to nematodes unless I see, like, it's not something I get a common question about. Is like, I've got nematodes in my garden. How do I manage it? because fumigation is one that we don't really want to recommend at all, where you could have negative consequences and it won't really be worth the money. So I'd have to do a little bit further investigation on these for sure. And technically, not an insect. So.
All right, well, thank you, Steph, so much.
Yeah,
for-
thank you.
For your efforts, we have a little gift for you. I know, but you're just so good. Yes, this is, that's my brother, yeah.
Wow.
The local artist here, Terry Chandler.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully you can use that.
That's impressive. Oh my gosh. I can set this up in my office. I love it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please, fill out an evaluation form, that are over there by the sign-in sheet if you didn't pick one up. And remember our next month's, lunch learn, Michael Lane. And if we don't see you there, happy Thanksgiving, happy Veterans Day, happy Christmas, happy Kwanzaa. So thank you all.
Oh, yeah, pick a number out of the pie.
Yeah. So, we have, today, for those that have joined us in real live time, we have these lovely, potting plants or plants. Aren't they pretty? And so, are we doing 3 or?
I know, this is one. I mean, yeah,
All right,
I thought
what's
it
your
was
number? Did everybody get a number? All right, so the number is.
I might have,
Okay.
I'd have to draw a few times.
22.
Oh,
Okay.
Low numbers.
well.
High number.
Oh, high number.
Okay. 3. Tula.
I probably made too many numbers.
12. Oh no.
You may have to go.
Oh no. 16.
Yay!
Yay!
Yeah, we're gonna just-
Good. Okay.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Stuff,